thank you. Thank you, Qingling, for inviting us again. And thank you all for being here. I know some of you had a choice and some of you did not. But welcome to everyone. I don't know how much you all know about the topic that we are addressing tonight. We saw something here which was very disturbing, I hope, for all of us. It was for me. Some of you probably know a lot, and others of you probably don't know very much. In either case, I'll bet that what most of you know comes from a narrative different from what we want to share with you today. The corporate media, especially in America, has been quite successful through the decades in reporting mostly on one side of the conflict, taking the side of Israel, and largely demonizing the other side. So many newspaper reports of the conflict begin with the current deadly action committed by a Palestinian and conveniently ignore the provocation committed by the Israeli military or settlers. Sort of like what happened before this incident. The story of Palestine has been a very difficult one to share in America. Yet it's not a complicated story. It's not difficult to understand. You've heard people say, oh, there's so much going on there, it's just so complicated. Too complicated is a euphemism for don't go there. Just believe what the media tells you. The propaganda brilliantly and deceitfully told and retold, but uncovered in the film called Real Bad Arabs. Check it out. Check out this film for yourselves. It's on YouTube. Real, R-E-E-L, Bad Arabs. It'll help you understand the image that's been that has been created, the negative image of the Arab and the Arab culture through the last several decades. I'll begin with my story. I'm a Palestinian American, born in Jerusalem. My family has documented history, which reaches back to 1550 in the town of Ramallah. Have you ever heard of the town of Ramallah, any of you? Yes? Okay, well, it's 7 miles north of Jerusalem. Founded by my ancestors. I'm not making this up. When I was born, there was no Israel. My birth certificate says that I was born in Jerusalem, Palestine. A few months after my birth, Palestine was arbitrarily divided by the Western powers at the United Nations, and Israel became a state. How could such a thing happen, you might ask? Most people don't know or may have a vague idea about the answer or the total story. So I'm here to share some of that with you. In November of 1947, Palestine was partitioned, just cut in half. And actually, over half of it was given to the Jewish people. Jews had been streaming to Palestine for decades before as a result of the birth of Zionism, the Zionist movement in the 1890s. And with the following years culminating in the Holocaust, this small stream of Jews going to Palestine turned into a flood, and it became a problem. At the time of my birth, the overwhelming majority of people living in Palestine were Palestinian Arabs, though there were some Palestinian Jews who had lived there for many centuries, but a very small minority, Arabized in every way except in their religion. Their food, their language, everything was in Arabic. But the fact that the majority of the population was Palestinian Arab didn't seem to matter to European colonialists who wielded the power at the time. The indigenous people who had been living there for centuries, Muslims and Christian, Palestinians, like my family, since the time of Jesus, were not consulted or negotiated with. The partition was imposed on them with deadly consequences, even to the present, especially in the present. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that I underestimate or minimize the struggle of the Jewish people throughout the history. Their suffering, the Holocaust, I hope you know something of that. But it was the Palestinian Arabs who have had to pay and are still paying for the mistreatment of Jews throughout the so-called civilized world, which they, the Palestinians, had essentially nothing to do with. Last month, I was in Germany, and I made it a point to visit the concentration prison camp in Dachau. It was horrifying, is all I can say about it. And I felt the sorrow deeply, and I also felt the anger. I felt the anger rise within me over the fact that it was all so unnecessary. All that suffering and death of innocent people. I also felt a deeper anger that it was still happening in so many parts of our world today. And the least of which being in Palestine, perpetrated by descendants of those who died in the Holocaust. It pains me, and I'm not trying to be dramatic here, it really pains me to say this, but say it we must. It's crucial for us to study and try to understand the roots of the conflict if we are in any way to be part of the solution. The reason why there is so much hostility and bloodshed in Palestine, Israel today, is because from the very beginning, the establishment of the State of Israel, bad seeds were sown. The how of its origin was wrong, much as any colonial settler endeavor in history turned out to be a disaster for the settlers as well as those settled. And those whose land and identity was stolen from them. Just think of our own American Indians and how they still suffer what was done to them by the American government. And a shout out for Standing Rock here, right? Hopefully you all know about what's going on in Standing Rock as we speak now. History is filled with examples of this fact for those willing to study and learn from the past. And that's what you're doing here, studying and hopefully learning from the past. For those of us interested in resolving the conflict in Israel-Palestine, it is crucial that we understand the essence of the Zionist movement and how it has hijacked Judaism. One is an ideological, political movement, the other a cultural and religious one. The Zionist movement, from its very roots, intended to take all of historical Palestine and get rid of as many of the indigenous Palestinians as possible, no matter how long it took. And that is exactly what has been happening to this day. Several Israeli historians have written about this and include in their writings references from the declassified Israeli documents on this subject. And I brought some books. They're my books. You can't have them, but you can browse them and see that they are written, some of them, by Israeli historians about this very subject. And I also brought other things that you can take with you, some informational stuff. So, war broke out after the partition of Palestine in 1947 as the native Palestinians resisted the stealing of their land from under their feet. Think about that. What would you do if that happened to you, your home and your land taken away from you? By the end of that war, after much death and destruction, and it was mostly on the Palestinian side, Israel, which was more organized and better equipped militarily, gained control of 78% of historical Palestine. After the bombing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, which housed the British headquarters, and it was bombed by the Israeli terrorist militias. And at that time, in that hotel, one of my father's first cousins was killed. So after that bombing, the British gave up and pulled out. And they were supposed to be the protectors, those governing the area after the collapse of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Hopefully you're still with me on this. I'm giving you a lot of history. Am I going too fast? Are you with me? Great. And immediately after the British pulled out, guess what happened? Israel proclaimed itself a state. That was in May of 1948. The new Israeli state had a problem on its hands. What to do with the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians still living in parts of Palestine given over to the new Jewish state? Ilan Pappé, an Israeli Jewish historian, wrote a book about that period called The Ethnic Cleansing. I brought that book for you to look at if you are interested. The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine is the name of the book. In this book, he describes the systematic destruction of over 500 Palestinian villages, bulldozed, not kidding, bulldozed off the face of the earth so that no one would ever be able to return to them. Pappé also describes the systematic killing, massacring, and expelling of Palestinians. During that time, about 750,000, about half the population, half the Palestinian population at the time, was driven out of their homes, some at the point of a gun, or fled the shadow of terror approaching them, which is what happened to my family. I was an infant at the time, the youngest of 5 children, and the news of a neighboring village called Deir Yassin came to where we were living, and the news was 107 men, women, and children just systematically massacred in one day by the Israeli Zionist terrorist militias. Enough horror to scare away thousands more Palestinians. That's when my father came home. He was a school teacher. He said, "We are out of here." But where to go? And what parents would not grab their children and flee as fast as they could, hearing such atrocities nearby? My family fled across the river to Jordan, the country of Jordan, which is the place I remember as a child. And we never went back to Palestine to live. We spent the next 10 years in Jordan as poor refugees. And let me tell you, nobody likes poor refugees, right? Just think about the horror of what's happening in today's world in relation to refugees. But that's another story. My family waited for 10 years before we were able to come to America, which we did when I was 10 and a half years old. That too is another story. Maybe familiar to some of you or your parents here in Sonoma County. We have a lot of refugees here. The feeling of lostness, of not belonging, not being able to speak the language, and so forth and so on. A few years ago, the wife of a cousin of mine, after much coaxing, told me her story as a child. She was about 10 years older than me, so she remembered a lot more of what happened in 1948. She lived in Ramle, which was one of the villages that became part of Israel and was destroyed. She said that one night, in the middle of the night, her mother came to her, shook her awake, and told her to hurry up and get ready because the buses were waiting outside to take them away to save them from some bombing that was going to happen to their village. And they were supposed to be taken to a safe place. She remembers, can you just see this little 7-year-old? She remembers that she couldn't find her slippers, so she had to go barefoot. So they all boarded the bus and saw that others in their neighborhood were also boarding other buses. The buses drove and drove for what seemed like hours to her, but finally stopped in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by night. And they let everybody off. And then the buses drove away. And that's how her village was cleansed. But they consider themselves lucky, extremely lucky, because they came out of it alive. But imagine that. No supplies, no flashlights, no blankets, nothing. They had to walk and walk and walk, the children, the elderly, the babies, until they reached Bethlehem, which is where I always thought that she was from until I heard her story. They lost everything. Everything. They were never compensated for anything. Do you think people forget something like that happening to them? They don't. It goes into their children and their grandchildren, that injustice. Up until quite recently, there has been such a suppression of these facts about how the State of Israel began. When we came to America, when my family came to America, again, I was 10 years old, 10 and a half years old. In the late 50s, we couldn't and wouldn't dare say to Americans that we were Palestinian and explain to them what happened to us. It seemed the world's sympathy was only with the Jewish people. Clearly, the context is the Holocaust, right? Even in the churches in America, where I went every Sunday with my family, Israel, though most of its inhabitants were secular, Israel was thought of as a new incarnation of the Israelites of the Old Testament. And out of fear and a need to assimilate, here we are, poor refugee family, we kept silent. We didn't say anything about our past. The American media was key to spreading the propaganda of the Israeli narrative and keeping the Palestinian story under covers. How many of you know the movie Exodus that was really popular in the 60s? If you've never seen it, it might be interesting for you to check it out. It's just called Exodus. It was very popular at the time and told the Jewish story from a completely, intentionally propagandist point of view. And I read recently that that film was actually commissioned by the new Israeli government then, again, to gain the support, obviously, of the American people. The Americans believed every word of the Exodus. That propaganda favoring the Israeli narrative is still in force today in our mass media, as is the chokehold on the Israeli lobby in its many forms on our government officials on all levels, the federal, the state, as well as the local. I don't know how many of you keep up with what's going on in our local state governments, but just as an aside here, last month, our state assembly in Sacramento passed a bill signed by our dear Governor Jerry Brown, who I voted for, unfortunately, which will penalize, this bill will penalize any company which boycotts Israel for its human rights abuses of the Palestinians. Can you believe that? It's called AB 2844. Look it up if you're interested. So what happened to all the Palestinians who were driven out of their homes when Palestine was divided and Israel became a state? Well, you saw the film, the second portion that you saw, the refugee camp. I was in that camp, by the way, an Ida camp in Bethlehem. Like my family, many were dispersed all over the world, but the vast majority, hundreds of thousands, became refugees and were eventually housed in cramped refugee camps just like the ones that you just saw. The Palestinians call what happened to them in 1948 Nakba, N-A-K-B-A, which means catastrophe, because that's how it feels. And that's not only how it feels, but that's how it was, a catastrophe. Today there are nearly 5 to 7 millions. I saw that it said 7 millions. I thought it was 5. Palestinian refugees living in about 60 camps, most waiting to return to their land and their homes taken away from them. I have visited some of these camps, as I said, in Jordan as well as in the West Bank. And most poignant of all is the fact that some of these poor refugees, now second and third generation, have keys, the keys to their homes that they left behind. And of course, it's a symbol that they hold on to for the injustice, hoping that the injustice that was done to them, that they will get some kind of recompense. That they hope to be compensated for. Symbols of their right to return to their homes, those keys that they hold on to. Supported by international law and many UN resolutions. So in 1967, 20 years later, there was another war in Palestine, Israel. Israel had the military advantage and won the war. And the result is that now all of historical Palestine is occupied, is under military occupation to this day. I have a brother who lives there, and some aunts and some first cousins. And they are all under a military occupation. And I believe that Amin, our next speaker, will show you some of what that looks like, what a military occupation looks like. And you heard Alice Walker narrating the first film. She and other prominent people, Jimmy Carter, Bishop Desmond Tutu, and others have said that the apartheid in Palestine is far worse, if you can imagine that, than the apartheid that they lived through in South Africa. And I agree, because I've been there and I've seen it with my own eyes. I make a point of going back to Israel, Palestine, even though they give me a very difficult time, because I am Palestinian. Every time I go, it's a hassle. But I go because I need to witness to what is happening so I can come back and share it with you and other people. There are incidents of desperate, well, before I go there, I just skipped a paragraph here. It's really shocking each time I go to see the brutality, the increasing brutality of the Israeli occupation over the Palestinians. I'm shocked over, it's like, it can't get worse, but it does. The destruction and stealing of more and more land and precious resources like water, so essential to life on all levels, and good arable land in the West Bank. But you know what? I'm also amazed at how resilient the Palestinian people are. It is just stunning how they just pick up the pieces and they do the best that they can, obviously because they have no other choice. There are incidents of desperate Palestinian youth committing desperate acts of violence. There's no denying that. But there's also a new generation of Palestinians in many villages peacefully demonstrating every Friday after prayer against their occupation by Israel and the stealing of their fields, the separation wall, and oh my God, it's unbelievable, the checkpoints and so on. And they go out there and they peacefully demonstrate, and they are and I've been there, I've seen it, and I've done this with them. And they are met with the military throwing tear gas canisters and rubber bullets, and it's crazy. It's surreal. And the United States government supports that. We as citizens, our tax dollars go to support that, which is, I don't understand it. In the Gaza Strip, I think maybe I'll skip the Gaza Strip even though it's so important because I think you'll bring up some of that. And there's just a little bit left here. Israel, in the Gaza, just one fact I'll tell you about the Gaza. With all the devastation that happened, 4 wars since 2008 to 2014, when they ran out of ammunition, there are, I don't know what to call them, warehouses full of ammunition there given by the American government for them. And so the American government allowed them to go into those warehouses and to use that ammunition. Some of you are probably wondering about the other side, why I don't speak to that. Well, there's plenty written from Israel's perspective in the mass media, which you can easily find and read. But this perspective, you have to admit, you don't hear too much about. On the contrary, most often the mass media has been known to demonize anything Palestinian and calls any criticism of Israel's policies towards the Palestinians anti-Semitic. You must be aware of that. It's a way of keeping the truth from reaching you, from reaching us. Most people, especially politicians, and those in power of any sort, can't afford to be called anti-Semitic, because most politicians get their money for their campaigns from these lobby groups, many of whom are, supported by the Jewish lobby. Speaking the truth about Israeli abuse of the Palestinians is not anti-Semitic. In my opinion, there shouldn't even be an Israeli or a Palestinian side to this conflict. It's ridiculous. What is crucial is the recognition that there is a just way of dealing with people and an unjust one, and that both sides are human beings deserving of equal human rights. A recognition that there is a good way to treat human beings and a bad one. To resist an unlawful occupation, I believe, is a God-given right. So what I'm speaking about here is the golden rule, the basis of all morality and ethics in all the great traditions, the religious traditions. Do unto others as you want them to do unto you. Do you know that rule? And do not do unto others what you don't want them to do unto you. That's what we're talking about here. It's not complicated. It's quite simple, and it applies to every human being, no exception. No one is justified in inflicting pain or deprivation on another person because pain or suffering was inflicted on him or her. Just because I had a rough life, it doesn't justify my beating you up. That's basically what this is about. There's no moral justification for that whatsoever. The case for Palestine is not difficult to understand. What is happening to Palestinians is wrong, period. All Palestinians should have their human rights like any other people anywhere. Resistance to oppression is a human right. Think of the American colonialist. You had American history. Remember what they did? How they resisted the British? Self-determination is a God-given right, so is living in freedom and dignity. Every human being on this planet, including every Palestinian, deserves to live in peace based on justice. Thank you.
represents exactly the dimension of the conflict. This is the dimension of the conflict. The United States, holding Israel vis-a-vis arms, and it is Goliath actually. My name is Nicolas, retired cultural historian, and I'm not trying to impress you with my qualification, but it is part of my life. I am from the second wave of refugees, raised from the first wave of refugees. She was born in Jerusalem. I was born in Jerusalem. But she was born downtown Jerusalem, which is fancier than the place where I was born. I was born in Eastern Jerusalem. Eastern Jerusalem is a borough of Jerusalem. Yet it is distinguished because it's so holy. It's a holy place called Bethany. Bethany came actually in the three biblical books, the Quran, the Bible, and the Quran. It was mentioned because it was a place where Jesus walked, and the tomb of Lazarus. And that Lazarus actually, tomb was there. That's why they call it the village Al-Aidi, which is derived the name from Lazarus. This is Bethany as was illustrated. Because it was a holy place, many of missionaries, European missionaries, they used to come to the Holy Land, and they used to love to make paintings, drawings, etching. This is one of them. And this shows you from the 1840s. PR of Israel will tell you that Palestinians don't exist. Of course, that means I don't exist. It's up to you to believe that. This is a town in 1860 under the Ottoman. And this is 1870 as a photo. And by the way, you see that up there are two heaps. And the two heaps are what is left of a Roman aqueduct. 3,000 people. The town was there since the biblical time and since the Roman. So is this Bethlehem. And Bethlehem in 1898 founded with this country. Just to show you, Palestine before Israel came, Palestine was quaint, sufficient, and the people were very content living in an environment where it was advanced. This is Bethany in the 1900s. This is Lazarus' tomb that I mentioned. And it shows you Lazarus' tomb between the 1900s and what is now. It's not much different. It's a place. It is a pilgrimage place. People go there because it's a holy place. This little town started 1800 with 65 people. 1900 around 2,000 people, and now it's around 25,000. Though most of the population is Muslim, we have 3 churches and 1 mosque. This debunked actually the argument of the religious divide that you hear about. It is all artificial and part of the propaganda. It doesn't exist. Race is a Catholic, I am a Muslim. Never actually even mentioned. So there is no such thing as religious divide. But they used to capitalize on it because it is divide and conquer. This is Bethany now. I visited Bethany in 2012. This is a settlement that was taken illegally from the land of Bethany and built didn't settle. Some of the land, by the way, belonged to my father, my grandfather. And you see the shacks. These shacks are inhabited by the people who live in the land. Take them out, put them in these tin cubes, cubicle, and settle. I'm trying to supply you, give you, provide you with some of the facts to help you understand. The United Nations, as Therese mentioned, Israel was established by Resolution 181. Yet, Israel ignored 765, up to this day 66 of the United Nations. It's the only state in the whole world that ignored that number of those. Israel is a state that is set on expansion. There is no intention for peace. This illustrates, according to the plan, how the Palestinian land was. I was born in 1947. I am 1 year older than Israel. So I witnessed actually the history. I did not read it in the books. Israel is a Zionist entity. It is not a Jewish entity. It doesn't represent the Jews. I have lots of friends who are Jews, and they reject all the immoral conduct of Israel. We are sold the idea of Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East. It is not. It's an apartheid system. That's resembles what's inside. In a democracy, you don't need a vote. And no one more eloquent than President Walrath, who's actually described it in his book. It's a fact that the United States supports the government. We know that. And in fact, this is very recent that President Obama signed the aid package. The aid package is $10 million a day. I think we as Americans, we have a right to know how to spend it. Spend things, purchase tanks, helicopters, and jet fighters to do this. And these things are from Gaza. You have to understand, Palestinians don't have an army. It's not an army facing an army. All these weapons is made to attack. It's not defensive. Yet, we are always hearing that it is in self-defense. That's not true. This is the destruction and the masculine that these weapons did in Gaza. Suffering and the pain, everything. I chose not to show any of the garage bloody scenes because that's not a place, this is not a place for it. You get help in the region itself, and there's ample reference for it. But it is indiscriminate, destruction. Even the worship places, they destroy worship places. As a matter of fact, there's a Catholic church in Gaza, and this is Father Emmanuel Musalla. And I was very much impressed by his state, because they lost the mosque, so he told them to come to the church and do worship. This kind of destruction, we never saw it except in World War I and World War II. Never happened in a war. Now we are going to discuss why that mass destruction. That mass destruction, by the way, is not by accident. It is by design. It is intended. It is to fulfill an agenda. This is known Chomsky, who is Jewish, and he's an author, he's very well known. His statement is, you cannot call it self-defense. And I'm using the testimonial of, don't take my testimonial, but the testimonial of credible people who are there. This is the reason. The reason is, as time goes by, the growth of the population is inching up. And when the green is going to get closer to the blue, that is scary. They don't want that population to inch up. That's a good reason for them, of course, to think about cleansing and put a lid on the population, especially in Gaza. Gaza, they have a reception period. It is just like a tree or a plant. When it starts flowering, chop it down. And every time that they will be out every 3 years, 4 years, they are going to clip actually the growth in the population in Gaza. This was the Prime Minister of Israel, and she will tell you to stop waiting why. This is how American weapons fail. Americans up to this moment, they don't know that fact. They don't know the facts. And if they only knew the facts, they would understand it. Is another prime minister saying something else? He was the first prime minister in brief, Israel's plan to kill, displace, and eliminate a generation if they can. That will slow down the growth of Palestine. Because the growth is much larger than the Jewish growth, and they cannot have that exist. It's a long term. So children, and this is the angle that I'm using in our presentation, are being arrested. And the children in Palestine are suffering the most in the whole world. They jail them like animals. A child of this age, how much he represents the danger to Israel? In their eyes, he represents because he's going to grow up and tip the balance to the population. That's how they look at it. A girl like that. Those kids, can you, as a human being, think ever that they represent a security risk to Israel? present images, because images tell us a lot. That special destruction of person, that's design. This is, by the way, design by the help of it's not only a bulldozer. It's not only a bulldozer to demolish. It's a bulldozer to demolish plus but only your scale. Sorry about that. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Does it
So
work?
bulldozers are designed as a military equipment, not only because they know that they are going to bulldoze houses, and the inhabitants are going to object to that. So they have machine guns, and it is operated by the army, by military personnel. They are huge, gigantic equipment that never existed before the design. What do the Palestinians have at their disposal to face this? Nothing. This is the island. It is out of frustration. You know what they do? They throw stones. And we heard in the film, when they throw stones, what is their punishment? Just for really throwing stones. You could see a settlement on the top of the hill, and this is how they expand, by eliminating houses and expanding the elite settlement. The human side of it, imagine somebody displaced and they have their house demolished. Now, when it comes to jailing children, Israel uniquely, by the way, among all the states in the whole world, is they have a jackpot, they jackpot that we go over 700 Palestinians. This is, by the way, from the West Bank, let alone the children in Gaza that are suffering. This is testimony by President American. He is an American journalist. Has another testimony. Relations of Israel, by the way, the testimonial is extended to many parties that they know about the relations of international law, human rights, Geneva Convention, and they disregard just they are backed by the power of the United States, and they feel that they could be the way to anything. Now, these faces of children, imagine they are going to grow up in such an environment. If we are going to think 15 or 20 years from now, with those children growing up, then you could imagine those children, how they are going to grow up. Of course, there is about the political side, which is very simple also. I don't think there's some communication. It is one man, one vote, justice, equality, for I don't think it is not fair for any people or anyone. As an activist, I'm going to rush because my time is. I want to tell you that justice in Israel is supported by some Israelis, some Jews in the United States, and worldwide. It is not just one person or the Palestinian. And this is Michael. I have a chance to know him. He's an Israeli author, and he is a peace activist. Those are peace activists who are demonstrating in Israel. As a fact, this is recent as 263. People around the world understand and demonstrate in support of Palestine. And this is one Sweden, all in one, all in Europe. Our president himself made that statement. And our other president, former president, who was active in peace, might not agree with the ideology of this man, but actually I would take his testimonial as of some value. That is the most powerful thing. That I believe Einstein when he said that. And this is what Therese mentioned about us. There's a question for you. Why should you care? Why should you care? Because our morals and supporting what's right and what's good define us. We could do whatever we want to walk through. But that's precisely what we define. And I believe President Duke said that more eloquently. You are silent. You are actually taking the side of others. You have to stand for what's right, what you believe. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, thank you for having me with us. Why am I here? Because I'm a person known as Jewish. But also because I strongly disagree with the policies of the State of Israel vis-à-vis Palestine. I would like to be known as a person first, and not a Jewish person. I derive my spiritual and humanistic values from Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and especially Buddhism. So, I'm also here, I suspect, because I am a survivor of the German Nazi occupation of my country of birth, France, more than 85 years ago. I know what it is to be occupied, to have to carry a proof of your identity on you at all time and show it to any little young person carrying a gun. In those days, only men. I know what it is to fear to be rounded up in the middle of the night. My sympathy is with the Palestinians. And I will do all I can to support their cause. Hence, I am here. I understand the impulse for the creation of the Zionist state. Christians demonstrated in the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century that they did not want Jews among them. So Jews said, well, let's create a state. There's one problem with that, is where you go and create a state. It is equivalent to the pilgrims coming ashore and saying, there's nobody here on this continent. Let's occupy it and take all its resources. Well, there were people in Palestine. And there's been people in Palestine for a long, long time. I do not accept the Israeli story of this is the country of the birth of Judaism. I believe that we all began, as far as we know, in Africa. Homo erectus started in Africa, and for reason probably of climatic change, moved north. And there you go. Well, look at a map. The passage is right there. It's called Palestine. So they went north, some went east, some went west. And they slightly changed color as they changed climate. Takes thousands of years, but that's how it works. And if you want to go further than that, I want to quote Stephen Hawkins, you know who he is, who said, your ancestors, all our ancestors, to the 10th power are fish. So don't feel exceptional because you're white European. Your ancestors were fishes. And some of them took to the air, and some of them took to the land. Some had flippers, and some others got wings. Again, took a long time. So no one has any claim to any piece of land. I don't care what you look like, what you believe, spiritually, what your sexual orientation. You walk straight, you got 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 heads, you're a person. You can believe anything you got then please. You could have any orientation you got then please, any spiritual views, provided you don't exclude me. And the trouble with Israel is that it wants to exclude people, including those who were already there. Now, that brings me, you're going to go to a little work there. That's why you're in school, right? French writer called Émile Zola, 1840, 19, I think 02. You look him up. Z-O-L-A. Emile, E-M-I-L-E. He wrote a book called J'accuse. I accuse. What was it about? The French High Command, military High Command, in 94, I guess. Let me look it up. Accused a Jewish captain called Henry Dreyfus, D-R-E-Y-F-U-S, of having contact with the Prussians, enemies, and so on. Émile Zola, the writer, did some research and find out that wasn't the case. He accused the French military high command, because he felt it was his duty, of anti-Semitism, cover-up, and so forth. Nevertheless, Dreyfus went to forced labor in Guyana. What did we call that? Devil's Island? They made a movie about a guy who escaped there. I think his name was Papillon or something. You may know about it. And the guy who blew the whistle, Émile Zola, was put in jail for defamation of the state. Does that look familiar to you? Emile Zola, the first notorious whistleblower who showed the wrong of the state, he's the one who goes to jail. And the victim is a poor scapegoat, this good, straightforward guy, French soldier, Dreyfus, goes to Devil's Island. He was eventually exonerated. But unfortunately, we have a way of repeating history. And I do not accept for a moment that a person as persecuted as the Jewish people have been, including this one here, has a right to go and persecute another people. It cannot be done, and it has to be stopped. Now, I understand, how are we doing for time? Is there a timekeeper in the house?
Yeah, over there. You still have 10 more minutes.
What?
10 more minutes. 10?
I've got 10 more minutes.
Close the discussion.
Okay, then I'll, okay, so, yeah. So I've been a refugee, so to speak. I identify with a Palestinian woman you didn't see. Therese used to have a film where she showed an old woman sitting all day long at a checkpoint with some jerry can full of water, waiting for some young person with a gun to open the gate so she can go onto her land. You've got to try to understand the humiliation involved there. Those pictures were fantastic. Those pictures were mean. How can a people who have suffered so much turn the thing upside down and do that to somebody else? Now, is it true what a psychologist would say that an abused child becomes an abusive parent? Could be. Could be. I have my suspicion that it's far deeper than that. Talking about, we are all here responsible. Atrocities are being committed in your name with your money. You cannot stand still and say, oh, well, I'm not Jewish, come and take the Jews who live next door, that's okay. Or, no, I'm not a communist, so they can take the communist away. Oh, they can take away the gypsy, I'm not a gypsy. Excuse me? When they come for you. You're going to say, well, where's that? You are responsible. To your own self, you are responsible. If you do not complain when the police is killing black and brown people in America, you are an accomplice. When the state, whoever it is, France, England, wherever you happen to be, is committed atrocities in your name, and you say nothing, you are hurting yourself. You become an automaton. They tell you to jump, and you say, yeah, I'll jump. How high do you want me to jump? Yes, sir. Yes, boss. You've got to keep something in you that is human. You've got to feel what those people are feeling on a daily basis. It is wrong. It is immoral. And in the end, destructive. If you have any values as human being, you have to stand up and say enough is enough. And I don't care if I'm a Jew or a Buddhist or he's a Muslim and he's a Taoist and he's a this and he's a that. You can be anything you want. And I got to respect it. And you got to respect my right to speak. And you got to speak And I, because I'm not afraid of anything anymore, you know, I used to talk and people with my friend Therese here, we used to talk in a high school and we get some Jewish person come and yell at me and I get funny telephone call telling me I'm a traitor to my race. I said, excuse me, what race are you talking about? I know of only one, the human race. Doesn't happen anymore. But I'm not afraid of anything and I'm going to talk. And I will say right now, the way Zola did, taking on the whole French government in his days, I accuse Israel of rape, because rape, by definition, is the entering of a body without its consent. It has entered the body of Palestine without the consent of its people. I accuse it of theft, for destroying, as you saw, houses that didn't belong to them, all villages that didn't belong to them, and finally of murder. I've been in the French resistance and I did things far worse than throwing stones at the Germans, who were then the enemy. It is a natural impulse when they come to destroy your house to want to protect the people you love, your family. I hope you still have it in you to do something about the condition, not only here, take your pick. Everywhere in the world, you see people being humiliated, disinherited of their place to be, murdered. And who gains? That's a big question. Who profits from this slaughter? Who profits from the dehumanization of human beings? Somebody does. Somebody does. Huh? Politics and economics are intimately linked. I leave that up to you to decide. I want to give you food for thought. I want you to do a little work. And I want you to really look down inside and say, how would I feel if I was the child of the woman you saw there on that film, who's being dispossessed, humiliated, and the only tool he's got is unlocked. Thank you very much. Questions open to all.
Questions or comments? Anyone?
I was just going to ask, how does Barack Obama support it, but he still supports these alternatives? But he still has a most house.
That human monkey that me are asking me about Therese.
Could you please repeat the question so everybody can hear?
How does President Obama support Palestine and have a moratorium, still give Israel all the money for killing?
That's an excellent question, and what I just said.
I think only in words, certainly not in money. Money goes to Israel. Because, like the Saudis, they buy a lot of equipment. We give them the money to buy the equipment. Whether it's Caterpillar tractor or that was Hyundai, but that I saw there. But the weapons, those, the planes, the bombs, all this, all that. It's your money, folks.
Anybody else? How about you?
I have two questions and
Real loud.
okay. I have two questions and I was free to answer them. I remember I saw this book or something, it was on TV, and they were talking about it. And in the book it argued that because Germany was responsible for the displacement of the Jews, they should have been responsible for trying to bring them back together. I was wondering how you felt about that idea. I mean, obviously we don't know how history would have gone
in a way, there were several proposals to make a state in different places. And because the Jews, when they said, well, nobody wants us to go somewhere, let's go look for some land. They looked in Africa, and they looked in northeastern Russia, somewhere, I think it's called the Kamchatka Peninsula, that has a lot of land. But they ended up thinking, oh, the original, the Bible, the Old Testament, blah, 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 you know, as if they were the first people.
May I add something to that, please? Right. Zionist movement started in Switzerland, and they wanted Palestine. They tried to buy it with money. They went to the Sultan in Istanbul, who was under the Ottoman Empire, and offered money, millions of dollars. The Sultan refused. So that was the first step. Then things took course like what Noah was talking about Uganda and about Palestine. But the final thing is the Rothschilds are the wealthiest in England. They had control. One of their statements, and I'm quoting, the Rothschilds said, I don't care who is the Prime Minister of England, all of them in my pocket. And the Rothschilds convinced the British government, and Bill Ford, he made a declaration in 1917. He is giving Palestine on a silver platter to the Zionist movement. And this is how the whole thing started.
Anyone else?
Well, she asked how it is connected to Syria.
Yes, like how should we learn from this and try to speak in Syria?
Syria, okay. I'll make it brief and succinct because we are getting into that World Cup. After the Arab Spring, corporation, oil industry, arms industry, pressured the American government, get involved, and this what happened. They lit the fire on Syria. They want to destroy Syria. Why? Because the Golan Heights is occupied by Israel. They discovered there's oil there. They sold the right to Rupert Murdoch and the Rothschilds. They cannot extract the oil illegally from occupied land. So what happened is destroy Syria, there's no more country, and they could do that. And that will be the future. Why Syria was destroyed. It's intentionally and by design. That's how it's built.
I was just wondering if
She had her hand first, sorry.
I wanted to say to
Laura, one's with Dora and Flora.
that you were very inspiring and that I could really relate to what you were saying, and you really woke me up and woke up my spirit, and I appreciate you speaking the truth and everything. You were like an activist, and when I become older, I would definitely like to be as sharp as you and just like you. And
I love you, girl.
The final question. Did you have the final question?
is the only way Israel able to get away with this is because the U.S. backing them, they're an ally?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because in the United Nations, whenever there is a resolution, the United States has a veto power. So they rely very much on veto. And when they veto, that means they cancel the resolution. As they do, they could get away with 65 resolutions actually. They are in violation of international law, human rights, the Geneva Convention, the United Nations resolutions, and everything